I've been driving for the past 2 hours to the Marriott in Baltimore, where my wife is attending a conference. The plan was to surprise her by dropping in and taking her out for dinner. Yeah, right. Over the last 3 months, I've had suspicions that my wife, Megan, might be having an affair with a coworker. Every time she went on a business trip, training session, or conference, it seemed she was getting back later than expected. Tonight, I aim to catch her in the act and bring it all to an end. Megan and I have been married for 14 years with 2 beautiful children, 12-year-old Sarah and 10-year-old Todd, currently staying with my mother. We got married right out of high school after dating during the last 2 years. Megan, with her long brown hair, slender figure, and strong facial features, was always bright and cheerful. Until about 3 months ago, I thought we had a strong marriage, but little things made me uneasy. I hesitated to confront her, fearing I'd appear paranoid or jealous. The conference that day was conveniently close, giving me the chance to drop in unexpectedly and potentially catch her in the act. At the hotel counter, I handed over my suit bag and introduced myself as Phil Jenkins. My wife Megan was attending the insurance conference in room 214, and she had informed me that I could pick up a key there. After confirming my identity, the clerk handed me the key, and I nervously made my way to the elevator. Questions raced through my mind about what to do when I caught her, how to approach the situation, whether to knock or walk in, and if she would be alone with the safety latch on. As I walked down the hall, I decided to use the key to open the door and see what happened next. Trying to be quiet, I unlocked the door, swung it open, and found Megan at a desk with her briefcase open, doing paperwork. She turned around with a gasp and expressed surprise at my unexpected presence. I explained that I had some spare time and thought I would drop in to take her to supper. Megan welcomed the idea and assumed I would be staying the night, expressing a desire for some company. Walking over, she gave me a big kiss. Realizing that my plan to catch her cheating had failed, I jokingly inquired about having a quick moment before dinner. Megan suggested a carnal gesture before her shower, promising a night of whatever I wanted afterward. Relieved that my suspicions were unfounded, I was glad I hadn't lost the woman I loved. We shared a brief carnal session, and with a big grin, Megan headed into the bathroom for her shower. I gathered myself and took a seat on the bed. Megan's toiletry case sat on the dresser, prompting me to check for aspirin to alleviate my driving-induced headache. No pills were found, but in the side pocket, something odd caught my eye. Slowly, I retrieved a pack of 6 contraceptives from the case, holding them in my hand as I sat on the bed. After Todd's birth, Megan switched to birth control pills that made her nauseous, leading to my vasectomy. Since then, we abandoned contraception, enjoying the freedom from contraceptives or pills. Now, the question arose, why were these contraceptives in her toiletry case? I'm not foolish. Swiftly concluding that my wonderful wife was indeed cheating, I felt uncertain about what to do next. Rummaging through her case, I found safety pins kept for clothing emergencies. Taking one, I carefully punctured a hole through the middle of each contraceptive, replacing them as I found them. While Megan was still in the shower, I contacted a friend at home. I informed Freddie that I needed him to do a favor for me, and he agreed without hesitation. I asked him to wait about an hour and then call me on my cell, explaining that a pipe had burst at the school and I needed to return urgently. I assured him that he just needed to make the call, as I would handle the rest. Freddie acknowledged the plan and promised to call around 7. Deciding I didn't want to spend the night with my wife, I regretted our previous actions and wished to avoid further complications. I would ponder on the drive home, aware that I had to take some action, though uncertain about what. As Megan emerged from the shower, I struggled to restrain myself from confronting her, burning up inside with a desire to retaliate against the woman who was my wife. I'm not a violent man, usually keeping my temper in check. I realized it was better not to let her know about my awareness of her infidelity. By the time we reached the dining room, I was thoroughly depressed. I suggested that Megan could order anything she wanted as it was on me. She responded that she wasn't very hungry and decided on a small fillet, suggesting a bottle of rosé to go with it. After placing the order, I couldn't resist probing a bit. I asked Megan if she was happy with our marriage, to which she replied affirmatively. She mentioned having a nice home, 2 great kids, and a husband who loves her. expressing that she couldn't ask for more. I shared my occasional doubts about whether I was doing everything to keep her happy, expressing my feelings of luck to have such a fabulous wife and how I had to pinch myself to believe it was real. Megan reassured me, calling me a silly goose and acknowledging that's why I had driven all the way down to see her. She expressed that she didn't think I had anything to worry about, as she was happy and content and believed I was doing all the right things. She added that a woman couldn't ask for a better husband. Our dinners arrived, and we engaged in small talk throughout the meal. As plates were being cleared, my cell phone rang. I excused myself to the lobby to avoid disturbing other diners and waited a few minutes before returning. I explained that my friend Freddie had called, informing me about a water pipe breaking at the school. I apologized and mentioned that I really had to get back there as soon as I could, resulting in the cancellation of our planned night together. Megan's face displayed a look of disappointment, but I couldn't discern the authenticity of her emotions. It seemed that whether I stayed or left didn't matter to her, as one way or another, she was going to face consequences. While boarding the elevator, Kirk Langford disembarked and greeted Megan, mentioning that he had stopped by the room for supper but received no answer. He extended his hand, introduced himself as Kirk Langford, and expressed that Megan talks about me all the time. I explained that I had come down for the night, but had to return due to an emergency, and it was challenging to shake hands and feign a pleasant smile. As we rode up in the elevator, I addressed the nagging issue again with Megan, expressing my desire for her to quit her job and my discomfort with her working with Kirk. I emphasized that we had discussed this before, and it was crucial to me. Megan responded that she had no intention of quitting, enjoying her job and learning a lot from Kirk. She suggested that I needed to overcome my paranoia about Kirk and her. After a quick kiss in the room, I picked up my bags and left for the trip home. The entire journey home, I couldn't shake the thought of Kirk stopping by Megan's room after supper. By the time I reached the house, I was a wreck. I had developed hatred towards my wife for her actions. I wished I were adept at devising ways to catch cheating spouses, but I was dumbfounded. What could I do? I couldn't even figure out how to avoid closeness with her. Divorce was what I truly wanted, but lacking sufficient evidence left me defeated. My wife was unfaithful, and I knew it, but couldn't take any action. Unwilling to endure it, I sought help. 2 days later, Megan returned home with a gleeful demeanor, infuriating me further. Checking her bag, I found one contraceptive remaining, still with a hole. Saturday brought the Globies insurance company picnic, providing some enjoyment for the kids. I wasn't looking forward to the day, suspecting some colleagues were aware of the situation. I felt somewhat exposed, trying to keep a low profile to avoid becoming the target of crude jokes. Perhaps I was a bit paranoid, but I couldn't help it. Megan enjoyed herself, socializing with Kirk and others, and although they weren't engaged in any carnal gestures, they were undeniably close. Being ignored suited me fine. A woman named Janet Langford introduced herself and expressed that I must be Phil Jenkins. She was stunning, and I found myself genuinely confused. While I thought highly of my wife and loved her, Janet Langford resembled a pin-up model with long auburn hair and big blue eyes. Despite her being a little short, her perfect body left me wondering why Kirk would cheat on someone like her. After exchanging pleasantries, we agreed to find a quieter place to talk. We settled on some benches about 100 yards from the picnic area, sitting by the lake. I offered to listen to whatever Janet wanted to discuss. She hesitated, expressing difficulty in bringing up a delicate subject. At that point, I knew she was aware of the affair. I decided to make it easier for her by mentioning that I had just found out about it that week. Janet seemed relieved and shared that she had known for about 2 months. She explained her plans to have divorce papers served and revealed that she had hired a detective to gather proof. Her lawyer had advised that Megan's willingness to testify or sign a notarized statement about the affair would strengthen her case. I inquired about the type of proof, and Janet mentioned having photos and taped phone conversations. Although she didn't have videos yet, she believed the photos were compelling. She also had times and dates that could be used as evidence. Janet expressed her willingness to work on it and asked if my lawyer could help her with the same divorce papers using some of the evidence I had. She emphasized her lack of proof and mentioned her appreciation for any assistance I could provide. I am also taking legal action against Globies. I possess statements confirming that specific management-level company officials were aware of the affair and took no action to stop it. They face a choice: terminate both individuals involved or confront a $1 million lawsuit. Impressive, right? Kirk is playing golf tomorrow morning. Can you come over to the house around mid-morning? You should be gone until late afternoon. I can show you what I have, and we can figure out if there is anything we can do. I reside at 26 Hemlock Avenue in Crestmont. Okay, it's a plan. Not really a date, but you know what I mean. We both chuckled a little. I felt at ease with her. We walked back up to the picnic area, and no one noticed our absence. I felt much better about things. Maybe this whole mess could be resolved. I sure hope so. As expected, the next morning, Megan informed me she had some shopping to do and would be gone for a couple of hours after she left. I dropped the kids off at my mom's and headed to Crestmont. Janet greeted me at the door, and we entered the den. A nice leather couch adorned the room, and on the table in front of it was a large computer monitor displaying an image of an empty motel room. She gestured for me to sit down and offered beer, soda, and wine. I chose regular soda, specifically Pepsi. I asked Janet to share what was going on. Janet explained that in a few minutes, we would be watching her husband play a round of golf live and in full color. She anticipated that I might recognize the caddy accompanying Kirk. When I questioned how she arranged this, Janet disclosed that it cost her $400 to set everything up, and Kirk would cover the expenses. She expected the session to last about 2 hours, so she encouraged me to get comfortable. She mentioned having popcorn and nachos, and added that she would obtain a DVD of the entire session, gladly providing me with a copy. While she admitted not wanting to see the events unfold, she also expressed that she wouldn't miss it for the world, declaring, "Let the show begin." We engaged in small talk for about 20 minutes, during which Janet shared the information she had collected about the affair, including photos, tapes, and documents. The details she provided left me both amazed and crushed, confirming Megan's actions. Surprisingly, Janet revealed having 3 large koi ponds in the backyard. I expressed interest in bringing the children over to see them, and she seemed pleased. Just then the monitor showed activity, and as predicted by Janet, Kirk and Megan entered the room, immediately undressing without engaging in small talk or foreplay. The video was clear, though the sound was a bit garbled. I felt uneasy watching my wife and her husband engaging in carnal activities with a stranger on the couch. Janet remarked, "Wow, you don't see a body like that very often." I managed to smile, but didn't know how to respond. In fact, watching my wife in that situation left me speechless. The experience became increasingly uncomfortable. I finally addressed Janet, expressing my discomfort and asking if we had to watch all of it. I assumed she wasn't interested in continuing to watch either. Janet confirmed that she wasn't really interested, and we decided to discontinue the viewing. To be honest, witnessing my wife engage in carnal activities with another man is somewhat unpleasant, and I feel a bit uneasy watching it with you beside me. However, the entire event is being recorded, which is all we need for the lawyers, and we don't necessarily have to watch it. I can't say I derive any enjoyment from it, and the plot seems quite predictable. Are you planning to head home or something? Well, actually, I was hoping you could show me your koi ponds. I think that would be much more interesting than 2 hours of huffing and puffing. Her eyes lit up simply because I had shown an interest in her hobby. As we walked to the back of the house, Megan reached her first climax, and I couldn't help but think I was going to have a more enjoyable afternoon than my wife. The 3 fish ponds were fantastic, and I was particularly intrigued by the pumping and filter systems, given my background as a plumber before working at the school. Kirk didn't assist her with her hobby at all, and she had to hire people for pipe or pump work. I offered to help her anytime Kirk was playing golf, not with any romantic intentions, but simply to learn more about the koi ponds. Spending time with her was an added bonus. After a few quickly passing hours, we returned to the house. The motel room was empty, signaling it was time for me to go home. Janet promised to call when Kirk had another golf game, so I could visit with Sarah and Todd. The next few weeks were challenging. Each time Megan took a shower, I would check her bag to find a new supply of contraceptives. I couldn't fathom when she found the time to use them all. I kept a safety pin on my keychain, ready to puncture them any day now. I anticipated Megan might have to make a surprise visit to her sister. On evenings following Kirk's golf games, the kids would excitedly recount their visit to the koi lady, showing Megan pictures of the fish they drew and sharing the names they gave them. She never connected Kirk's wife to the koi lady and seemed relieved that I could keep the kids occupied while she was otherwise engaged. I made 2 more attempts to persuade her to quit her job and end the involvement with Kirk. Both times, I received the same rejection, with the second one being particularly unpleasant. I also started making excuses to avoid closeness with her, and she responded with digs about my masculinity. It stung a bit, but it made everything I was doing easier to justify. Finally, on a Tuesday night, she dropped a bombshell, expressing that she had been feeling really stressed lately. Megan suggested taking a few days off from work to visit her sister for about a week. She acknowledged my efforts with overtime and late nights, and thought it would be a good idea for me to relax while she was away. Megan believed that a trip to my sister's would be much better than spending a year with a shrink. She encouraged me to have a good time, assuring that she would take care of everything. Megan was glad that I understood the necessity of the extra work for the good of the family, but expressed a concern that she might have overdone it. I struggled to sleep that night, preoccupied with the tasks awaiting me the next day. I was relieved that the moment had finally come. Megan's sister Nancy and her husband Brad lived about 3 hours away. Brad, while an okay guy, could be a real idiot, especially when Nancy called the shots. Interestingly, their town had 2 termination clinics, and I had gathered the names, addresses, and operating hours for both. I even familiarized myself with the terms of agreement required for services at each clinic, noting the 2 days cooling off period they both mandated. Assuming Megan's first appointment was on Wednesday, the earliest she could schedule the procedure was Friday, giving her a few recovery days before returning home. This provided me with a day and a half to finalize my plans, which seemed manageable. After Megan embarked on her rest and recuperation trip, I began making preparations. I had to explain the situation to my parents, acknowledging my failure as a husband. They understood and offered their support. The kids enjoyed their time with my parents, and Dad's truck would be useful for moving Megan's belongings. The lawyer would have all the necessary paperwork ready for me on Thursday morning. Janet's paperwork was also prepared, and she planned to serve Kirk simultaneously with my serving Megan. The only internal struggle I faced was whether to give Megan one last chance to make amends. Though I held little hope, Dad and I spent the rest of the day packing Megan's things. On Thursday morning, after a 3-hour drive, I reached the first clinic, only to face disappointment. This left me with one more option: the Family Planning Center. Approaching the receptionist with all the confidence I could muster, I explained that I was Phil Jenkins and that my wife, Megan, had instructed me to come and sign a consensual agreement form. When the receptionist inquired about the form's specifics, I admitted not knowing the exact name, but mentioned that it was a form stating I understood everything, agreed with it, and wouldn't pursue legal action. The receptionist confirmed Megan's identity and mentioned that her sister had signed for her, but my signature would be better. She checked the computer for a few seconds, then retrieved the file. I seized the opportunity and signed the form just below Nancy's signature. Noticing that the procedure was scheduled for Friday morning at 11 a.m., with the requirement to be there an hour early, I inquired about any remaining payments. I took out my checkbook and placed it on the counter. The receptionist assured me that Megan had already paid the full amount of $800 in cash, and there was nothing else due at that time. I expressed my gratitude for her help and mentioned that it made the process a lot easier. The reception I received upon arriving at Nancy and Brad's place was overwhelmingly insincere, bordering on comical. Megan initiated the conversation, expressing surprise at my presence and asking what I was doing there. I responded by explaining that Mom and Dad wanted to keep the kids for a few days, so I took some sick leave and decided to visit them. I mentioned that I needed to unwind a little too. The room fell somewhat silent, and I sensed the wheels turning in everyone's heads. I had put them on the spot, and now they had to find a way out of it. I observed Nancy nod to Brad, signaling him to join her in the kitchen. Megan engaged in casual conversation about various topics. After a few minutes, Brad returned to the room with a suggestion. He proposed taking the day off the next day, borrowing his buddy Jack's bass boat and spending the day on the lake to ensure we wouldn't be bothering the ladies. I agreed, expressing that a day drifting on the lake would make all my worries disappear. I suggested checking if Jack could join us, and Brad agreed to get everything set up. Everyone seemed relieved with how things unfolded. We had an uneventful dinner and spent the rest of the evening chatting about various topics. However, there was no closeness that night, as Megan didn't want her sister to overhear. Early the next morning, Jack was waiting with the boat, and Brad prepared lunch while stocking the cooler with beer. We engaged in conversation while loading the truck and the boat. Brad asked if I was getting into the truck as I stood by the passenger's door. I informed him that I had decided not to go and suggested that he make the most of the day because facing Nancy for the next few hours wouldn't be pleasant. Brad spent about 5 minutes trying to persuade me to go until I had to get firm. After a couple of well-placed swear words and some physical threats, Jack and Brad took off. I went inside, poured myself coffee, and turned off Nancy's cell phone. Then I called my dad, who was always up early. We chatted for about 2 hours, ignoring the constant call-waiting tones. Brad must have tried reaching Nancy for hours. As Nancy and Megan got up, I said goodbye to my father and braced for the impending confrontation. I cleared the missed calls on the landline and turned Nancy's cell phone back on. In less than 2 hours, Megan and Nancy needed to be at the family planning center. In about 5 minutes, I would face 2 furious women. I finished the first pot of coffee, so I brewed a new one for my wife and her sister. Megan exclaimed, questioning why I was there. I explained that I wasn't in the mood for fishing, so I decided to stick around with them for the day. I suggested finding a nice place for lunch together, mentioning that I had to leave that night and didn't want to spend the day with Brad and Jack on a boat. Megan rejected the idea, stating that she and Nancy had plans for the day and preferred to go by themselves. She emphasized that she could go out with me any time, but she only got to see Nancy a couple of times a year. Additionally, she pointed out that I would be there all week. I tried to convince Megan, expressing that she could spare me at least half a day since I had driven all the way down there. I suggested she could have the rest of the week for her sisterly activities. Nancy left the room, dialing a number on her cell phone. Megan sat in a chair, appearing defeated as if pounded by a truck. We could hear Nancy screaming at Brad over the phone, as if he had committed the crime of the century. I felt sorry for the guy, but he married her. Megan expressed that she and Nancy didn't want me tagging along for the day, emphasizing that they had their plans set, and it didn't include me. I agreed to hear their plans for the day and decide whether I was interested or would find something else to occupy my time. I expressed my confusion about the situation since they had the entire week, and I only had that day. I jokingly asked if they were meeting some guys. Megan clarified that they weren't meeting any guys, but planned to do some shopping for carnal items like bras, underwear, and hot nightgowns. She explained that these were items they didn't want guys around gawking at while they were trying them on. I suggested that most of those shops were in the mall, and I could keep myself busy doing other things while they used the dressing rooms. I offered to tag along and stay out of their way, assuring them that they wouldn't have to worry about entertaining me during lunch. I promised to take them to someplace fancy to make up for the trouble I caused. At that moment, Nancy stood in the doorway, glaring at me without saying a word. Megan could see that she wasn't going to be able to reason with me and seemed ready to give up. Both were still in their housecoats, and eventually Megan stood up. Megan stated that she had to go get dressed and left the room. Nancy, looking at me, called me a real bonehead before following Megan upstairs. About 20 minutes later, the light on the landline phone illuminated, indicating someone upstairs was making a call. The clock was ticking, and they had an hour to get to the center. I considered my next move if they tried to leave without me, planning to follow them and make sure they knew it. However, I didn't believe they would attempt that. After 20 minutes, both of them came down the stairs. Megan informed me that it was time to go shopping, adding a bit of an attitude. Surprisingly, it was a bit easier than I thought it would be. I speculated that the upstairs phone call was likely to the family planning center, possibly to reschedule the appointment. Since I said I was leaving that night, they probably figured the best way around the problem was to just wait until I left. I wasn't trying to stop Megan from getting the termination, but I wanted to make it more difficult for her. I insisted on taking my car because I wanted to drive. I didn't want them ditching me somewhere a few miles from the house. I pulled into a service station. I filled up the gas tank, checked the oil and water, and cleaned the windshield. It was the most time I ever spent servicing my car. They both just sat fuming. When we arrived at the mall, I parked far out so we'd have a good walk. Once we were in the mall, I pretty much left them alone. I kept an eye on them but really could care less about what they were doing or buying. They didn't seem to be having any fun. They spent most of the time talking to each other and making gestures. They bought a few things just to show me they had been shopping. I tried to stay hidden but still keep them in sight. There was definitely some serious discussion going on. The time for the appointment passed. I had succeeded in delaying the inevitable. I knew she was still going to get the procedure, so I had no intention of interfering any further. Shortly after noon, they came back to the center court of the mall where I said I would meet them. We went to the Olive Garden for lunch and got back to the house around 2 p.m. There wasn't much conversation during lunch or on the drive home. I was smiling to myself the whole time. I knew these two were upset with me right now, and I didn't care. What a wonderful feeling. I grabbed a beer and relaxed on the sofa. Brad finally arrived, and for about 30 minutes, Nancy verbally berated him. He managed to slip out and disappeared for a couple of hours, returning by supper time. After the girls finished cleaning up, I requested a private conversation with Megan in the kitchen. Nancy sneered, and they both went into the living room. Megan remained upset due to the earlier events, and I sensed she wouldn't be easy to deal with. I got straight to the point, expressing my desire for her to quit her job and stop seeing Kirk Langford. Her teeth clenched tightly, and she struggled to refrain from hitting me. She insisted that she didn't want to hear that again, expressing her frustration with me bringing it up repeatedly. Megan refused to waste her time answering me, stating that I already knew the answer, and it wouldn't change. She gave me the ultimatum to either change the topic or leave. I reached into the manila envelope by the chair and pulled out a legal-sized envelope. I explained that I had asked her at least 10 times in the last 2 months, and each time she refused. I presented the divorce papers, suggesting she sign them and mail them in. I mentioned that there was a self-addressed stamped envelope included, and if she wanted a lawyer to look them over, she was welcome to do so. She glared at me and leaned across the table, expressing frustration. She stated that I couldn't divorce her just because she wouldn't quit her job or have the friends I wanted her to have. Megan insisted that for a divorce, there needed to be grounds, and I didn't have any. She suggested it was time for me to go home and get my act together. She emphasized that she was my wife and had no intention of giving up her home and family just because I didn't like where she worked. I responded by reaching into my manila envelope and bringing out a stack of photos. I placed 6 pictures of Megan with Kirk on the table and asked if she had lovemaking with him. There was no answer as I placed another 6 pictures of them in various positions on the table. As I continued putting more pictures on the table, she started screaming at me, urging me to stop. I acknowledged her reaction, understanding that she perceived my actions as spying. She criticized me, calling me a sneaky person and expressing disdain for my approach. She questioned why I didn't address the situation directly and accused me of behaving like a pervert, stating that my complaining made her sick. At that moment, my cell phone rang, and I answered it, learning that my dad would arrive in 10 minutes with Megan's belongings to Nancy's place. As I hung up, she asked about the call. I informed her that my dad was bringing her stuff to Nancy's place, explaining that the locks had been changed at our house. I offered to retrieve any forgotten items if she let me know. She remained silent as I handed her the title to her car, mentioning that I had signed it over to her. In an envelope, I included half of the money from our bank accounts, approximately $200. I outlined arrangements for her to have visitation rights with the kids once a week, with the possibility of an overnight stay monthly if she made a statement attesting to the affair, and had it notarized. I added that I had a DVD from the May 10th visit she and Kirk made to the Scandia Motel, which was 2 hours long and captured everything depicted in the pictures. As I collected the photos, I clarified that I hadn't taken any of these. I wasn't concerned about your activities. I just didn't appreciate being deceived. Lastly, I'd like you to have this keepsake from our love. I removed the safety pin from my keychain and slid it across the table. I revealed the pin to Megan, explaining that I had used it to poke holes in all of our contraceptives for the past 2 months. I mentioned that she had used 48 rubbers in the last 2 weeks alone, and Kirk had been more fortunate than I ever dreamed of being. She responded with anger, calling me a miserable weasel and deeming my actions the most despicable thing she had ever heard of. I retorted, stating that the most despicable thing was having an affair with someone outside of our marriage. I acknowledged that I might be considered a fool, but she was a cheating partner. I informed her that I had to run as my dad had just pulled up in the driveway. I noted that she never apologized or expressed remorse for her actions. As I left, I told her goodbye and wished her well with her termination. On Monday, she finally started crying as I left the room. Nancy rushed in to comfort her, and Brad followed me out to the front porch. Brad questioned my actions, stating that I couldn't throw away a 14-year marriage over a misunderstanding. I challenged him, asking why my wife had come down to visit him and Nancy. Brad looked down at his feet for a few seconds, seemingly thinking. Eventually, he apologized and offered to help me unload the truck. We finished unloading in about 10 minutes while Megan continued crying in the kitchen. I didn't know what she was crying about, and frankly, I didn't care. Kirk and Megan were both fired from Globies the next week. Megan refused to sign an affidavit. The lawyer said he had a strong enough case without it. I didn't hear from my loving wife at all. After that night, she did not come to see the children. They didn't seem to mind because they were forming a good bond with Janet. We spent a lot of time together as a family. Mostly, there was no lovemaking or even talk of it. We were not going to do anything that might jeopardize the divorces. The kids and I were learning a lot about Koi and having a great time doing it. At last, after 4 months, both divorces were final. Megan never fought hers, but Kirk went down kicking and screaming. He lost the house, all the investments, and ended up having to pay a large monthly alimony payment. A few days before Christmas, Megan came to the house with presents for the kids. I was polite and didn't do anything to ruin the holiday spirit. She stayed for about 2 hours and then left as quietly as she came. Nothing was said between us about the divorce or the affair. I put the house up for sale, and 2 months later we moved in with Janet. Kirk took a job in Omaha, and Megan went with him for months. Later, Kirk disappeared and didn't tell her where he was going. Megan moved back in with Nancy after Brad left for a job on the Alaskan pipeline. 2 months later, Nancy received divorce papers in the mail. The two sisters are good company for each other. Janet and I are comfortable with each other. She adores the kids, and they feel the same way about her. We are planning on getting married in June and spend every moment we can practicing for the honeymoon. Second story. We needed to have a serious conversation, no doubt about that. As I looked up at the woman who had been my wife for more than 2 decades, it was evident that the last few years had changed the dynamics between us. "It's over," she said, her voice strained, almost choking on the words. "Mike and I are no longer together." I nodded, offering my condolences as she stood there, hands nervously twisting together. She went on to share that nearly 3 years had passed since she promised that things would return to normal. I gently probed for the reasons behind the breakup. Gwen, avoiding eye contact, mentioned my growing unhappiness over the past few months. Familiarity had set in, and the magic spark had vanished. The situation struck a familiar chord. I couldn't help but recall a conversation from over 2 years ago when Gwen had dropped the bombshell about our lovemaking life becoming mundane and her taking a lover, a younger, more vigorous man. She made it clear that she intended to continue the affair, leaving me with an ultimatum: accept it or risk losing her, our home, our kids, and my job working for her father. To top it off, she even threatened me with domestic misuse charges. The memories flooded back, and the déjà vu was unsettling. Gwen reminded me that she had previously mentioned that the situation wouldn't last forever. She thanked me for my patience and understanding during that time. I responded with a nonchalant shrug, not offering much to the conversation. She continued, outlining her plans for our future. She suggested that we could return to normal, and I could move back into our bedroom whenever I wanted. She even proposed doing so right away, citing her emotional distress over Mike ending their relationship abruptly. Curious about Mike's actions, I inquired about what he had said. Gwen, sobbing, revealed that he had criticized her for aging, stating that she had gained too much weight. He expressed dissatisfaction with being seen with her and mentioned wanting someone younger in his life. I carefully commiserated, avoiding disagreement with Mike's judgment. I expressed reluctance to sleep in our bed again, considering the numerous times it had been used by Gwen and Mike. Gwen insisted that she never had Mike over when I was at home, referring to the times I was at work or away on business in France. She suggested getting rid of the old bed and buying a new one the next day. I sarcastically mentioned that a new bed might be nice, and an awkward silence ensued. Eventually, Gwen enthusiastically promised to make it up to me, acknowledging that we hadn't been carnal for over 2 years. She assured me that things could easily return to how they used to be. I questioned if it could truly be the same, and Gwen, gaining confidence, affirmed that it could. She expressed optimism about us getting back to how things used to be. I questioned whether we could pick up from where we left off, considering the embarrassment I faced in front of our family and friends. I mentioned how I stopped going to the village pub to avoid seeing my friends, knowing that Gwen and Mike frequented it. Gwen apologized, acknowledging that her actions may have been thoughtless. She justified her behavior by stating that everyone knew about her affair with Mike. She hinted that my comparisons of Mike's prowess in bed to mine contributed to the situation. I reminded her of the hurtful comments relayed to me by their friends. She insisted that Mike wasn't better, but just different and more exciting than our lovemaking life had become. Despite my understanding, I expressed reluctance to easily return to our bedroom, citing the damage to my male ego. Gwen suggested a weekend trip to Brighton, staying at a familiar hotel and driving my classic Jaguar XK 140. I commented on the difficulty of returning to our old carnal routine. I shocked her by revealing that I had sold the Jaguar a year ago, highlighting how little attention she had paid to my life. She was taken aback, expressing disbelief that I had sold the beloved car I had spent hours renovating. I informed her that we couldn't buy it back, and she suggested using money from the company or her trust to get another one. I declined, emphasizing that it wasn't for sale and questioning where the money would come from. I informed Gwen that she had signed away the trust money 5 months ago, explaining that the funds were used for our children's house deposits. She seemed surprised and asked if that was where the money came from. I responded, stating that I did inform her, including my decision to sell the Jaguar. I mentioned that she was preoccupied with her affair and the microphone during that time. Gwen inquired about the family company's financial status, and I confirmed that the company was fine, but no longer owned by us. She seemed oblivious to the recent paperwork finalizing the deal. Desperate to understand our financial situation, Gwen asked about the sale of the business and whether we were still rich. I let her stew for a while, allowing her to reflect on the changes that occurred while she was engrossed in her affair with Mike. I then revealed that her share from the sale of the business would just about cover the mortgage on the house. Confused, she asked about the mortgage, indicating her detachment from financial matters. I clarified that I had spent my half on a 45-foot sailing yacht, as I had taken early retirement and planned to spend my days sailing the seas. Gwen expressed her dismay, stating her hatred for boats and the sea. I acknowledged her feelings, but emphasized that there was no room for her on the boat anyway. She demanded an explanation, wondering why there wasn't enough room for her on such a large boat, seemingly reconsidering her dislike for the sea. I explained to Gwen that the sailboat was designed for just 2 people, including the deckhand I hired recently. Despite this, she insisted that she could still accompany me, suggesting exploring the Mediterranean or sailing to the south of France, reminiscing about the enjoyable time she had there with Mike last year. I interjected, mentioning that there was only one cabin on the boat, more or less true. She loudly repeated her surprise about the single cabin and questioned the whereabouts of the deckhand. I revealed that the deckhand was a woman who had been sleeping with me for some time. Upon learning that the deckhand, Giselle, was a 28-year-old French blonde, skilled in boat knowledge, cooking, and passionate in carnal matters, Gwen burst into tears. The next day, I left for France to join my boat and Giselle, leaving Gwen still sobbing. It took some time, but my plan was coming to fruition. I hadn't informed Quinn about the 6-bedroom villa I had purchased nearby with the money I had saved before selling the company. I looked forward to enjoying the pool and playful moments with Susie, who had a penchant for not wearing the top half of her bikini. I also anticipated the joy of opening the garage doors, where my old Jaguar XK140 had been sitting alone for too long. It would soon be taking Giselle and me to a familiar French restaurant down the coast. As for Mike, he experienced misfortune when he was mugged outside his favorite bar, suffering injuries including 5 broken ribs, busted kneecaps, and the loss of his purse and one of his testicles. It seemed the tables had turned, marking the end of his happy days.